We have like a million regression manhwas. This genre is by far one of the most oversaturated genres ever. And as we saw with something like isekai, when a genre becomes this bloated, oftentimes the quality of the genre regresses. But it's not something that can stop me from pulling out my phone late at night and start reading these manhwas before bed. And I know you've been there. Don't lie to me. So, when I was casually reading my usual regression slop, I came across a manhwa that I fully expected to be another mid-ass regression power fantasy with a generic main character, only for it to turn into one of the most profound and beautiful pieces of fiction I've ever read in this medium. SSS Class Revival Hunter. And I am extremely glad that I didn't drop this manhwa in the first few chapters, because as you've already seen in the title, this video is about how this manhwa went from mid to peak storytelling in regression setting. So just by reading the first few chapters, I had considered this manhwa the true definition of mid. Usually this word is associated with something bad, but in my opinion, it means something that's not bad, but also not good. And to explain why I thought this manhwa was mid, I have to summarize the first 2 chapters. It opens up just like any other power fantasy manhwa with a tower in them. If you're a manhwa reader, you know how all these manhwas start. A tower appears and people get powers and they form guilds and they decide to reach the highest floor of the tower. But this manhwa doesn't waste any time explaining any of that to us in the first chapter. Instead, we get introduced to the top guild of this world, Black Dragons, who wanted to clear the 40th floor of the tower but failed because the #1 ranked hunter known as the Flame Emperor was able to single-handedly clear the floor and beat the boss. When they interview him, he seems like a hot-tempered person. The scene shifts and we see our miserable main character Gongja, who is envious of the Flame Emperor. The only thing on his mind is how much he wishes to be like him. And I remember when I was reading the first 2 chapters, I thought, man, this guy is so pathetic. Just look at him. And I didn't know that Gongja is going to be one of my favorite protagonists ever. But while he is in this pathetic state, he then suddenly sees a golden light above his head and immediately recognizes it. In the history, only a select few get to see this light. When someone does something substantial, the tower itself rewards that person with a magical skill. And in our main character's case, an unsightly envy is yet to be found in history. So the tower is really moved by his jealousy. My man was so outrageously envious that he awakened his power. That's fucking awesome, because the card is golden, meaning it's an S-rank skill. And you bet it's a skill more broken than that of a Flame Emperor, and the rest of the journey is smooth sailing until the #1 rank, baby. Here we go! So, what's the skill? Activates upon death. After dying to the enemy, you can copy one of their skills and make it yours. However, you die. This is brutal, man. I always thought of it as the tower itself mocking our main character. They're literally telling him to go die. But how does he defeat death? In chapter 2, we get some details about the world and the tower. Then we see our devastated main character walking around in disbelief. So of course, for sake of progressing the plot, there has to be a convenient way for him to go around this skill. That's when he hears a scream coming from an alleyway. To his surprise, he sees a flame guy threatening his partner. He asks the girl some questions, and once he gets his answer, he mercilessly grills the girl to the oblivion. Frightened by what he just saw, Gongja tries to run away, but unfortunately for him, the flame guy sees him and catches him immediately. After a nice little friendly chit chat, he cooks the main character as well. So, due to his death, his skill requirements have been met, and now he can choose one of the skills of the Flame Emperor. But once he selects the skill, he dies. I'm explaining all of this to emphasize how simple the start of Manhwa is, because of course the random skill he chooses is regression. Activates upon death, returns a user to 24 hours prior to death. After returning, all memories and abilities are retained. So not only he awakened because of his outstanding jealousy, he conveniently got the solution to his skill. That is just classic Manhwa trope. And at first glance, some people might even dislike this thought because this is extremely simple and convenient for the main character. But if you've been a Manhwa reader for a considerable amount of time, you just accept certain tropes of this visual medium. In simpler terms, think about all the anime tropes that you've just gotten used to but are actually kind of weird. In these types of medium, there are certain things that we've just accepted. So one might critique the start of this manhwa heavily. Someone else like me would be like, yeah, he got the skill, so what of it? All in all, I want you to understand that having a start like this in a manhwa is neither bad nor anything innovative and substantial. It's just mid, and it's really fascinating to me that with such simple start and simple rules of dying and regressing, the author managed to write such highly emotional arcs later in the story. My fascination isn't the regression itself, nor how Gongja, the main character, uses it. It lies in why he uses his power. Right from the beginning, we understand that he doesn't do anything out of selfishness. Even though he decides to get rid of the flame guy as an act of selfish revenge, the manhwa gives more reasons for him to do so by making this guy a narcissist maniac who doesn't care about anyone's lives. But the problem is Gongja can't just kill the guy. He's just gonna regress. So he decides to unalive himself enough times to go back 11 years back in time, just to go back to before the flame guy's awakening, and that is just insane. This opening really shows the lengths Gongja is willing to go. And although every time he kills himself, he can feel the pain, that doesn't stop him from sacrificing himself. When he goes back 11 years back in time and offs the Flame Emperor, he then decides to take on the tower. In most manhwas with a tower setup, the higher you climb, the tougher the challenges and enemies. But in this manhwa, every 10 floors have a theme that, with a beautiful storytelling and a fantastic world building, it develops Gongja's character. While some other manhwas might only focus on the final goal of reaching the last floor, Gongja, however, only cares about an ending where everyone is happy. He's not the strongest MC in this genre, but what he has is an iron will and a strong sense of justice while being completely down to earth and selfless. He's willing to sacrifice himself as much as it takes to ensure the best possible outcome for everyone. And for that, not only he has to get stronger, but he also has to take his time and spends it knowing people on a deeper level. He's not insanely overpowered and he can't solve his problems by brute force. Instead, he has to think about the problems and come up with a solution that leads to him dying thousands of times, perfecting every single step. Mix that with the fact that he's always longing for the best possible outcome, I experienced a fascinating storytelling unlike anything I've ever read in manhwas, except for Omniscient Reader's viewpoint. The first two arcs, being the 10th floor and the Demon King arc, were pretty decent. When Gongja reaches the 10th floor, he's presented with a chance to acquire another S-rank skill, and the obvious choice is select it and easily clear the floor as soon as possible. But instead, he chooses a skill that can instead help him come to a better understanding about this floor and a deeper understanding about the tower in general. As a result, he realizes almost nothing is what it seems at first glance. He still can overpower the floor by choosing the S-rank skill, but he chooses not to. When I said he wants to ensure the happiness of everyone, that also includes the living beings in each floor. They're not enemies, they're not NPCs, they're not random events and obstacles. They are, or once were, people with real lives and emotions, real struggles and tragedies that Gongja now has to face. The two first arcs were interesting enough to make me keep reading. They weren't the best, but they still had unique and interesting ideas, and I could tell the author is doing the groundwork for later arcs. And I go back and forth about how much I should talk about this and the next arc, the two arcs that made me absolutely fall in love with this story. And I don't want to take away the experience of anyone who's going to read this manhwa for the first time, but if there was only one reason that make this manhwa worth the read, it's these two arcs right here. I couldn't tell how these two arcs would play out when I entered them, but never in my life I could predict that it can lead to something this emotional and impactful. Comparatively, this manhwa has less action and more reading, but I think the payoff is worth it. It's worth mentioning that each arc feels like an homage to a popular genre. The first of the two arcs I mentioned draws from the Murim setting, while the next one explores a genre I've been interested in recently, villainous and romance. The Murim arc really moved me with its poetic and meaningful writing, and as for the romance arc, well, I absolutely fell in love with the development of these two characters. I'll admit I'm not particularly well versed in romance genre, so my opinion might not carry much weight, but this was the most beautiful and precious romance I've ever read in a manhwa. The manhwa was on a break for a few months, and as of writing this script, the new season just started. I'm so excited for the future of this manhwa. This is easily my second favorite manhwa of all time, only behind Omniscient Reader. But honestly, with how good it's been, I wouldn't be surprised if it eventually ties for the first place. SSS Class Revival Hunter has a thought-provoking story. The development of Gongja is brutally well done. He does look like other main characters, but once I get to know him, I realized how different he and this manhwa is to everything else. And I can confidently say this manhwa is fucking peak! Thank you so much for watching my video. I really hope you enjoyed it. There are a lot of more manhwas that I like to talk about in the next videos, but if there's any manhwas you'd like to see, please recommend it to me down in the comments. I really appreciate it. But again, thank you so much for watching my video. And as always, see you in the next one.